Also, some of the motivations that brought me to write this paper have been progressively more and more tackled by the literature, but they still are there. Okay, so there's two limitations that that I found out in the literature. When you write a paper, and as well when you write a thesis, you always have to find gaps in the literature and motivate your research. Why do you do that? What is the gap? What don't we know that we'd like to know? So there was the first motivation was that there was a general lack of focus on the analysis of dynamic networks. So how networks evolve over time in clusters, in regional clusters. There was several important key contributions in the economic geography literature that pointed at the fact that clusters should be studied over time, so the importance of dynamics. But there was virtually nothing, and there is little now, but still some contribution are appearing on the dynamics of networks. So that was the first limitation. The second limitation was that most of the studies focus on what we call high-tech hotspots, so very high-tech places, famous places in the advanced world. So we know a lot about how Silicon Valley works. We know a lot about the US biotech clusters, but we know very little about how the rest of the world works. So this is another issue to be considered because we need to understand how firms behave, not just in Silicon Valley, and widening a bit the scope of the observation, focusing on low-tech or less fashionable countries is another issue that I wanted to pick up in this paper, and particularly I focus in an emerging economy. Instead, some recent contributions have tackled and tried to focus more and more on emerging economies. Even management scholars now are working on emerging economies because they realize that the US economy is becoming challenged by these countries. So they are starting to focus more and more on these countries. However, still the attention on these countries is limited. So this paper, sorry. So to address this limitation, this paper analyzes the interorganizational network dynamics, so the dynamics of an interorganizational network, a network between firms, in the context of a wine cluster in Chile. Why the wine industry and why Chile? Chile is well, there are a number of practical motivations, but the theoretical ones are that Chile is a growing, very successful Latin American economy based on, because we know that we have to justify the choice of the industry to restaurant brands, even though there are other motivations. But this is what you have to pretend to do, so I will do that. But I think there are good motivations anyway, so I'm not just making them up. Okay, so Chile is really one of the growing countries in Latin America, and it's an impressive trend of export growth, especially based on natural resources, of course. Copper is the dominant one, but there are others that are very important. Among them is the wine industry, and the wine industry is impressive because they have managed to catch up with international producer of fine wines, so good wines, in about a decade, over the 90s. They have really invested as a country a lot in this industry. They have university research programs on issues that are related to applied research in the wine industry. There are firms that have become technology leaders, so it's really an impressive catching up story. And there is literature on that. I want to contribute to that literature. The focus of this paper is on interorganizational networks, but the interorganizational networks are mapped and analyzed through the informal networks. So these the networks formed between knowledge workers working within firms. So I map the relationship between firms through the informal advice existing between different types of technical personnel, like in this case agronomists and enologists. So it's an informal network that I'm focusing on. And the main research question is looking at the micro-level mechanism. I'm going to explain this because it looks like micro-level mechanism underpinning the evolution of the interorganizational network. And by micro-level mechanism here, I refer to the decisions taken at the firm level. So what are the motivations for choosing to establish one new tie at the firm level that brings to the evolution of a whole network over time? So it's really a micro-centered type of analysis, which basically is grounded on the choices made by individual firms, and by firms I mean the people who make the choice of connectivity, therefore the knowledge workers mentioned earlier, and how this shape the evolution of networks. So in my paper, first of all, my idea, and I think it's quite easy, there's nothing strange with that, is that the evolution of networks is a complex process, and it's not just the result of one factor. So we cannot explain network dynamics looking at one dimension. There is not always one micro-level motivation. It's probably the combination of a set of motivations that all together concurrently exist, behave, are generated, some prevail on the others, and the existence of these microforces then lead a given structure to appear or disappear. For instance, I will look at three sets of effects. One is I call cohesion effects, and I will elaborate on each of them. The established effects, it's another set of effects I'm going to look at, the capability effects. I'm going to be slightly longer on this conceptual part and quicker on the empirical part, but can you tell me when I have just 10 minutes left? Sure. So, the cohesion effect is, as I will show in a second, if left operating, it will bring the network to become embedded and very densely interconnected over time, whereas status effects and capability effects will progressively lead networks to become more hierarchical. I will explain that, but the key idea here is that the micro-level choices, so the decisions that are taken by each individual at the same time or in the period of observation will lead to a structure or to one type of structure or to another type of structure. And the type of a network structure may influence the development path of a cluster. For instance, a network like this one, the first one, which everybody is connected to everybody, it's a network that is very inclusive. Every actor is connected to the network, has something to learn from the other, so there is a very inclusive pattern of development that is a model of development that is characterizing that cluster. Whereas a hierarchical cluster network it can be a model of development in which there is one dominant firm that basically leads the whole development process. If you think about some of the clusters in which there is a lead firm, a large multinational corporation, that is the only dominant actors and all the other actors depends on it. So it's a very vulnerable type of development model because it depends on the behavior of one individual firm. Whereas a more comprehensive type of network structure may have different developmental implications. There is a more collective engagement of all the firms. So the firms in the community of the cluster may grow all together collectively in a more even way, if you want. So, talking about cohesion effects, first of all, I would like to say that this conceptual framework is built on network studies, organizational sociology theories, economic geography, and a little bit of evolutionary, what is called as evolutionary economics. So it's really drawing on different strands of literature. The cohesion effects are very much, as I will tell you, it's very much into the narratives of industrial cluster literature, if you are familiar with it. And there's, so I'm making some hypotheses that you will find in the narratives, but that have not been openly and explicitly tested in quantitative terms. So one is the search for reciprocity. Reciprocity is the idea that if firm A and B are connected to each other at time 1, there are many chances that they will be connected. That means that the time will be reciprocated at time 2. Okay, so if A is transferring knowledge at time 1 to B, at time 2 B will transfer knowledge to C. And the advantages of reciprocities are several. First of all, reciprocal relations tend to be stable, tend to be a relationship in which there is a lot of mutual respect and trust. So they tend to be a relationship with someone you trust, and therefore this gives you a lot of value in what is transferred as well, in the quality of what is transferred. So this is the first hypothesis, that in the network, within a cluster context, firms will over time look for more reciprocation of their cars. Of course, here the network is directed because, as I've told you before, what I'm observing is an informal network of advice. So it's transferring advice to someone, and this is not by definition a reciprocal thing. If I ask you something about biotechnology, and you know more than me, you are transferring me something about biotechnology, but I may not be able to tell you anything about anything that is of interest for you. So the advice is really a unidirectional type of relationship.